Hey, I'm Kristen Anderson and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Ashland Branch Manager, and this is our August Read This. We're taking the books that we shared during our Friday Reads installments on social media over the month of July. We had 5 in July. And we'll also share some other books that you might enjoy if you've tried those or if they sounded cool. There might be some other books in our collection that would be interesting. So I'm going to start with Beneath the Keep, which is subtitled A Novel of the Tearling. It's by Erica Johansson. It is a prequel to an existing series. The existing series is a trilogy and it's called The Queen of the Tearling. The novel Queen of the Tearling is a high fantasy with a strong female lead. If you read the entire series, you will discover that it is not only a high fantasy, it also has dystopian, utopian, post-apocalyptic kind of stuff going on, but you kind of need to get to book 2 to really understand that that's what's happening here. Beneath the Keep, though, should be a straight high fantasy prequel to the setup for the Queen of the Tearling. And I'm really excited to go back and revisit the world because the Queen of the Tearling just was had a really fascinating world. One of the things I like when I read fantasy is actually counterintuitive, but when you have a female villain, it can be really entertaining and interesting to see women behaving in villainous ways too. And the Queen of the Tearling does fall into that category. I thought that people who like Tearling might also like a series that's pretty deep into its existence, probably in book 5 right now, I think. The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, which is kind of one of those that's near future. There's magic, it's dystopian, there's a little bit of romance, and kind of a villainous underground of magic users in a kind of an authoritarian country, which can have overlaps for people who like high fantasy, because you see a lot of authoritarian regimes played with in high fantasy as well. So I would highly recommend any of those titles to you. Next, we shared The Divines by Ellie Eaton. The Divines is a boarding school story for adults. Because I was thinking about other boarding school series, I decided to pair that with 2 other boarding school books that I read fairly recently. Madam by Phoebe Wynne is set in England. It's kind of a thrillery book, but the main character is a new teacher in a boarding school that has been around forever, and she begins to understand that there's a lot going on in this boarding school in terms of its real purpose. But she is teaching these young girls Greek mythology. And so there's also this element of Greek mythology stories that can extend out into thinking about books like Circe by Madeline Miller, as a connecting point if you're interested in Greek mythology books as well. And also All Girls, which is by Emily Layden, and it is also it's told in multiple voices from students at a boarding school going through a sexual harassment scandal, and all of the different girls' voices are what brings the whole story together. So it goes from teller to teller. It doesn't rotate through points of view, but it tells a unique and interesting story and kind of deals with some of the both the elements of power and powerlessness that young girls often encounter in their lives. The novel Consent by Annabelle Lyon was another one we featured. It is a novel about sister relationships and specifically twin relationships. There are 2 pairs of siblings. One set is twins, the other set older, younger. Both have different abilities. So one or very different and distinct personalities. And then there's a tragedy, and one of each of the siblings develops a relationship between themselves as a part of the story. But it made me think about other twin stories And so I thought I'd also share Little Darlings by Melanie Golden, which is really a story about a mom of twins, and it's more horror changeling kind of story. And also The Good Sister by Sally Hepworth. And Sally Hepworth writes books with an Australian setting, and they tend to be thrillers. And this is two sisters. One probably reads as a character as non-neurotypical, and one of them is behaving ethically and the other is not. It's first-person narration. It's not entirely clear which one's behavior is, which one of the two is the good sister until you get pretty deep into the story. So it's an interesting thriller to read because it has some elements of dealing with how we look at and assess people with abilities, with like neuroatypical people, and it was fascinating, and I really enjoyed that one. Next, we shared The Absolute Book by Elizabeth Knox. It's a pretty complicated, dense fantasy featuring a librarian character, and it made me think of a couple of other librarian fantasies, which oddly is turning into kind of a little bit of a subgenre of its own. And the two other books that I'm thinking of have a little bit of horror/fantasy built into them. So there's The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, which is particularly creepy. And there's also The Librarian of the Unwritten by A.J. Hackwith, which is the first in a series called the Hell's Library series. And there is a sequel that recently came out to this one. So there's more beyond the first book. When you look at the covers, which they're probably going to put up over here, there is a very clear tendency to want to put a book with the center of it blown out in some sort of aggressive way to show horror/fantasy about libraries. So new language in the language of book covers, look for those if you like library fantasy. The Library of the Unwritten is about a library of books that have never been published, and the characters sometimes get bored and out of control a little bit, and there's a librarian whose job it is to take care of it, which I plan to take that job at some point. And although it does sound a little bit creepy and scary, maybe I'll just stay where I am. But Body of Stars was the last book we shared by Laura Maylene Walter. And that is a dystopian, futuristic story that deals specifically with women's issues. There's a future-telling element of it where at a certain age, what women's roles in life are established based on the patterns of freckles on their bodies. It's been compared to Red Clocks by Leni Zumas, and that is a near future kind of literary dystopian novel about a future that has that deals with the abortion issue. And so when I was thinking about Red Clocks, I also thought about a slightly older title that deals with similar themes called When She Woke by Hilary Jordan, which also deals with abortion and in a really interesting and unique way. So those are the books that I have for you this month, and we'll see you again next month.